If you find you're unsettled listening today, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com and click on resources.
We are men in the trades, forging health in the drug poisoning crisis. This is
Off the Clock Toolbox Talk.
We are here today with a fantastic crew. We have Trevor Botkin co-hosting back with us today. So welcome back, Trevor.
Happy to be here.
We have two guests with us. We're here to talk about Shayne's story. We have Shane Sewell with us. Welcome here, Shayne.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And we also have one of Shayne's colleagues. We have Duncan Jordan with us as well. Welcome, Duncan.
Thanks for having us. This is great.
Yeah. So we're kind of recording a double episode here together. We're recording Shayne's story and Superintendent Summit. And so that's why Duncan's joining us for Shayne's story as well. So Shayne, how do you want to start telling your story today?
Well, I think I'll start back, when I was young and kind of go through, some of the different experience that I went through. I think it'll help, some of the issues that I've had with addiction and employment and mental health.
And those are the three themes of things that we want to talk about, right? So that's perfect. And thank you for being willing to share your experiences, because that's how we best learn, is from each other.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, it started out fairly normal, at least from my memory. I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in Transcona, an area kind of on the edge of town. Life was pretty normal from what I remember of those days. We had a big toboggan hill directly behind my house. We had a floodway with bike paths and all kinds of recreational stuff. So, my younger childhood seemed quite normal. I had lots of friends. Growing up there was really positive. Only later on, once my dad was basically having trouble keeping jobs, drinking excessively, that's really when things started to change. And I'd say I was probably around maybe 8 years old at that point. We kicked around a lot. My dad really couldn't hold a job. He was a very, well-educated. He was the first one in his family to ever go to university. He worked in construction as well, designing buildings, that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So he had a very good job, and we had a very comfortable life in the beginning. It wasn't really until, like I say, till I was about 8, where things started to really go downhill. I had flunked grade 3, and they were really wondering why that happened. And it turned out that I was completely deaf in my right ear.
Wow.
So no one really ever knew till, I started going to doctors and figuring this out.
Yep.
So essentially, my eardrum had blown, and nobody knew. I guess you would think I would be complaining of, pain and all kinds of problems, but it was never discovered until later.
Yeah, kids don't always notice stuff like that. That's why we have to watch them so closely, is because they don't always notice stuff like that. So, wow, that's big though.
In crowds, or just trying to have a conversation with somebody with background noise, that kind of problem. That was a big part of I think a lot of my issues really at the time. I was feeling kind of picked on. The hearing problem was definitely an issue for me. I felt really isolated. I started to withdraw the friends that I had. I was slowly starting to detach from that. And then, what was going on at home. At one point, I remember, going to like family events were always the scariest part for me. My father was a very verbal, very angry drunk when it came to family events. So I was always on edge, what's going to happen next? We'd go for like Christmas or something to my grandma's house. It was just torture for me. I just remember just being in horror, always trying to be in damage control. And, I was just a young kid, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
So,
that's what we call trauma.
Tough. Yeah. Yeah. So that was really when, I started to realize that, this was a real serious problem that my father had. I never realized how much it affected me until I got with close family
Mhm.
and just realized, how broken the relationship was,
Yeah.
between my father and the rest of our family. Those were real tough times for me.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's where I think, a lot of my problems that flared up later with addiction kind of originated there. I was dead against alcohol because, I saw what it had done to my dad and, some other family members. I was just a mess, but obviously at that age, it was more just mental illness.
Mhm.
I was, I was going through, not having many friends, scared to
Mhm.
make friends. It was a horrible time for me, really.
Yeah,
Um,
really traumatic.
Like I keep thinking when I'm listening to your story about how for me there probably would have been a sense that I was different everywhere. Like I was different than the people at school. When my family went places because of my father, I was different. I don't know. Did you feel like the spotlight was on you, kind of like you didn't fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I always felt that. I'd say once, I was 8 to 10 years old, I really started to come back on how am I making this worse? Am I the reason why this is
Right.
happening? There's a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty about this is my fault.
And we always blame ourselves, but particularly kids blame
Yeah.
themselves when they have some kind of trauma going on around them, even if parents are having a relatively stable, happy divorce. Kids still blame themselves for what's going on.
100%.
So that's what we do as human beings.
And the other thing that's coming up for me when I listen is like we often would think about trauma and we think about its impact on us as individuals, but a lot of the times like we forget that this trauma was sort of taken on by an 8-year-old version of us. It's like any one of these things for an adult who's seen a few things to go through is one thing, but you put yourself back in an 8-year-old body and mind, and the damage was done then to an 8-year-old self, right?
Mhm.
Like I often forget, like even when I sit with peers sometimes, to like I have to remind myself, this didn't happen to them now in their current form. This happened to a child, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. So, basically, we moved to Regina, Saskatchewan. My dad had lost his job and things were still, I mean, he was holding it together somewhat, still had a nice home to go to. Things were better when we first got there. But a short time later, it cropped up again where we were, having a lot of problems. And, I was having a hard time fitting in. I was upset about the move. The last thing I wanted to do was just have to start over with a school and friends.
Yeah.
I was in, not the greatest shape mentally. And then, it got worse because, the verbal abuse and stuff like that. My dad's favorite line was always, you'll never amount to anything, was what
Oh
he would
God.
tell me and my sister, in his little drunken rants and stuff like that. So
What
it wasn't
a
long.
terrible thing to hear.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it
really
was it
tough.
was devastating. And I started to believe it, right?
Yeah. Well, we
So
would. I expect a lot of those comments were directed more in towards himself,
Yeah.
right? Like that's probably the way he felt, and he's trying to share that feeling.
yeah,
You know?
like now, as an adult, I took it super hard back then, but
For
Yeah.
sure.
I know he was just lashing out. He was, I don't know if it's asking for help or just trying to, minimize things, but he just was very verbally abusive. And my mom, she was powerless about it. She wasn't really mentally capable to, go on her own or do any of that, right? So things just got worse. My sister, who was a couple years older than me, ran away shortly after, I'd say, the first year that we were in Regina. We didn't see her for 8 months. So, that was really hard. And, my father was a mess. Like literally, he was trying to hunt her down. I was just getting more angry and angry dealing with him. I was starting to act out. I was ready to get into physical confrontations.
How old were you
I
at this
was,
point?
I would have been about 13.
Yeah, so you're coming into your manhood or your adulthood, right?
And that was really my first time that I remember using drugs, smoking weed with some of my people that lived in the neighborhood. That was kind of my first exposure to drugs then. And, I was dead against alcohol. So this was something that I thought would never have any issues or complications later.
Yeah.
But, that was really the beginning of how I justified some really hard times for me with my own addiction issues. Yeah.
Very
And it's
relatable.
funny how, you think about it, I turned out just like my dad
Yeah.
with a lot of the addiction issues. I was always a happy addict. Mostly I hurt myself. Partners that I've had of taking a brunt of a lot of that, addiction too. It was mainly I was hurting myself, right? I just hated myself. I didn't have the skills to trust in myself and to believe that I could do more, that I could have a happy life at that point, because I was always waiting for what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what was demonstrated to you too, right?
Yeah.
Like, you saw and you heard it. It was told to you that you'd never have anything. So, and why,
Yeah.
as a child, would you believe anything different than what the person responsible for you tells you?
Yeah.
And our neurology grows around these childhood traumas. It's literally the only way your body knows how to operate, with this dark sense of doom and gloom and constant panic. It's why it's actually called a trauma response. And we can't access the calm, the wise part of our brain, the rational part of our brain, because we're always in fight, flight, or freeze. We're always trying to take down the monsters that are coming after us, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it was a very rough through high school. I remember not really fitting in well. I think a lot of it too was, my hearing problem kind of, made that worse for me, because in crowds, I just wasn't good. I was really having trouble just even getting to school on a regular basis at that point.
Yeah.
I would stay up all night. I would want to sleep all day. I had no ambition to do much of anything at that point. And, it started to really show at school. Like, I started hanging out with probably the wrong crowd, smoking weed or something like that. And then just disappearing for, the rest of the day. So that was really when, I started using on a regular basis at that point. Although, then it was weed and mushrooms and stuff like that. So, I hadn't started any heavy drugs at that point.
Yeah.
But, I was well on my way. I was well on my way to making some really bad decisions.
Although interestingly, it sounds like you were doing the best that you could. And I would even like the way that you're talking about it, the way that you're reflecting on it, I'm thinking you were actually trying to practice harm reduction. You were trying to stick to the safer stuff. And it sounds like the story's going to escalate from there, but it sounds like you were doing your best to try to keep yourself safe in that. So
yeah, I'm hearing the same thing. Because I look back on the first time I drank alcohol, it was medicine. Like, I knew it right then. I was like, wow, I feel comfortable right now. I feel good where I am. And then really many parts, the rest of my career of drug use was really just chasing that sense of comfort and trying to feel like I fit in places. And my addiction in various different ways, it kept evolving, but it kept giving me that, allowing me that freedom and sense of belonging. So,
I mean, I felt that too. It was comfortable. Those people that I was using with, I was comfortable with. Right. And that was really the first time since we left Manitoba that I really had that feeling of, some sense of friendship, people that I could count on. I really gravitated to people that were using drugs.
Yeah, they're often quite like, there's community there, and we don't talk we talk about the Gabor Mate and connection and all that a lot. Well, that's, part of it. It's not just the drugs, but I always found, and looking back on a surface level, my drug using community I was a part of was very welcoming and very happy to see me and very non-judgmental because we all had the same secret, I think. But it was a place that I felt safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't graduate high school then. Basically, I was in and out. I was barely attending at that point. I had a meeting with the principal, I can remember, in grade 11. And at that point, he basically told me, you need to start looking for a job.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kicked out of school.
Mm-hmm.
And that really kind of made, my partying kind of, the drug use kind of got a little more extreme. All of a sudden I was open to drinking. So I started, drinking, smoking weed, that kind of stuff. And I was able to handle it for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a sense of comfort and having, people around me that were doing the same thing, and they seemed to be happy.
So I gotta think like getting kicked out of school was terrible feeling to like have that reinforce almost everything that you had been told and you'd be probably telling yourself at that point.
Yeah, I mean, but I was numb. I almost took it as a relief at that point. It kind of just justified a lot of my behavior.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it kind of, just said, hey, you don't need to be here anymore. You need to get out and you need to make your own way. So
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways, I think it was good for me in that fact, because I realized that I had to do something myself. I couldn't blame my father anymore. I needed to accept responsibility for, the stuff that I brought to the table.
Wow, good for you, man.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a real wake up call for me. At least I thought at the time. Right. And so, I had big ambitions. There at that time, there was not a lot of work in Saskatchewan. Basically, everybody I knew, either went to Toronto or Vancouver. So for me, that I chose Vancouver. I got into my old beat up Chevy truck and loaded up everything that I owned and headed out west.
Mm-hmm.
So and it started off so good. I was
The boy became a man.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I had gotten to Vancouver. A friend of mine had a place in the West End. So I went, unloaded my bed, and we got set up in this little small studio in the West End. And it was just wow, like, here I'm in the West End and all this, just the atmosphere and the vibe, right? I've never,
Mm-hmm.
I never had really experienced that before. It was great. It was a big party. And
Mm-hmm.
the fellow that I lived with had a job where he traveled down to California once a week and drove cars
Mm.
back to Canada, sports cars. So that's what I did for the first year that I got here, was basically traveled down to Los Angeles and drove sports cars back to Vancouver once a week.
Sweet.
So that was, and we had this apartment that was paid for. We didn't get paid a lot of money, but it was awesome. This was probably the best part of my life.
Yeah.
When I first, feel, wow, I can do this, I can be successful.
Mm-hmm.
And things went well for the first couple of years that I got here. I had gotten a really good job, and I was making half decent money later on. The party lifestyle, I started to pull myself back into a bit of depression. I still had this feeling of just kind of isolation and not good enough.
Mm.
You know, the driving the car thing from California, it went for about a year. After that, I had moved to White Rock, and I actually lived right on Marine Drive in White Rock. We had this little studio I had, and I could actually pull out my windows, and we could high five people on the street.
Wow.
I was working part time. And basically I was just living on the beach, throwing the frisbee around for 4 hours a day, just partying. Yeah, and then once that ended, once I moved off the beach, I had moved to South Surrey, just probably about 10 blocks away. Lived in a little basement suite, and that's where I met my first partner, who I ended up marrying. But by then, my drug use, had become a problem for me. I had started using cocaine about that time. That was like, when I got that first hit of cocaine, I tell you, I was hooked,
Yeah.
right? Because I was searching for something, and wow, that was it, you know.
Very
And
familiar.
right.
Yeah.
So I did have part-time jobs. I was able to pay my rent, and then I met my future wife, and things were really good. She was beautiful. She was smart. Her family, they were so nice to me. Like, why wasn't my life like this? Why wasn't my family like this? You know, and it was my first real wake up call of, yeah, other people have had very good childhoods, and their parents were very responsible and loving, and I was just in awe of how well mannered that family was. At that point I was completely out of control. Basically, we came to the decision that we were going to get married. And at first, I thought it was a great idea. I was all for it. Again, I was just in no condition mentally to be able to commit to her fully. I was a mess. At that point, I was disappearing, for a day or two on binges. She was the nicest person. Her family was so nice to me, and I pushed them all away. And once I started using cocaine, I could not stop.
If it's the one that sinks in, it's amazing. Like
Yeah,
it's hard to describe.
right.
Um,
And I'd go 3 or 4 days using constantly, and then I would finally get my sorry ass back home, and I would need to sleep for a day and a half. I wasn't functioning whatsoever, and I had this person who cared about me, that was willing to be there for me, be my partner, and I couldn't make it work. I was just too deep,
yeah.
and I had so low self-esteem at that point. I blew a marriage, right? And the only person really at that point that I had that truly cared about me. So
Dude, you're gonna make me cry, man. It's so
yeah.
familiar to my Karen knows a bit about my story with my partner, and like this, you're touching all the
Yeah,
nerves, man. Yeah.
yeah. But you know what I mean? But I I I couldn't get out of it. I was helpless, I was hopeless, and I didn't care enough about myself to really reach out for help at that point, even though all the signs were saying uncontrol, um, like life. I couldn't even do the basics of life, looking after myself. I mean, it was bad, right? And I went into treatment shortly after we split up. I went to the Maple Ridge Treatment Center for 5 weeks, and that's where I kind of first got a taste of, hey, this is not all my fault, but it gave me the some of the tools that I needed to work through the stuff and accept my part in it. Maybe I didn't deserve what happened to me, but I now had a few tools to kind of work things out in my head and accept where I was at, and then try to take some steps to move on with my life. But it wasn't shortly after I got out, the problems cropped up again. I had spent 5 weeks with a whole bunch of addicts who I thought I was better than. Some of these guys' stories were horrendous, like, in and out of prison, violence, all types of things like that. So, I kind of thought, hey, I was better than them, right? I could handle this a little better. So, that first round of treatment, gave me a few tools, but it sure didn't, it wasn't enough. And my self-worth wasn't ready to accept fully that I had to give up everything and just start over and, learn to live, on life's terms. I still was so stubborn. I would use for days and then I would be in remorse for days. Right. It was just a pattern that didn't seem to get anywhere. Then a few years later, I met my current spouse. I was functioning somewhat. I was going to NA meetings, kind of on again, off again. For the most part, I was able to stay, off the hard drugs at that point. But it didn't take long before it started to crop up again. I was just one of those people that just couldn't seem to get it. And, I had a lot of the same problems with my current spouse in the early days then as well. Like we met in just before 2000. We had a daughter in 2002. I would hold it together for periods of time, but I'd always have relapses, right?
Yeah.
So still disappear on the weekends here and there. And, I left her alone with our child. And there's a lot of guilt when it comes to a lot of that. And that's when I really started to realize that I had to do something, or I wasn't going to make it, right? Like, I was having suicidal thoughts. How could I do this to my daughter? And it's because that's what was done to me.
Yeah.
And how could I, get back to this place where I would put that, my relationship with the two people that cared about me the most, right? So
Yeah.
it was a rough, very rough time for me, but it was also the beginning of turning my life around. I credit my spouse for really helping me with that and getting me to a place where that I could be myself. I could learn to live without drugs.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what happened from there. I went back to the Maple Ridge Treatment Center. I went through the 5 weeks, and then I got an extension to stay for a couple more weeks. And from there, I did it. I got a year clean.
Good for you.
That was the toughest part for me, was just to commit. And even when I wanted to give in, that I was powerless. The first one, if I do one, I'm going to end up right back in that place, in that ditch at the end of the night, or the end of the binge, whatever that looks like. I finally had some purpose.
Yeah, there you go.
She finally was, making some headway with me, and just, spending time with my daughter and realizing where this was headed is what really kind of turned it around for me.
Yeah. My kids, their presence in my life really, really made me feel much worse about like how I was acting. Like it really added so much more consequence, and I hated that. But when I hear Shane talk, I hear about taking responsibility now for the path forward and committing to doing the work. And so when I did that, my girls, like my two daughters especially, became the biggest. We have a lot of repair that we have done and continue to do, but their love of me and their championing me, and like really, has made the process so much more tolerable for me, because I do this for me, but really I do it so I can be the best father they deserve. And like I have an opportunity. My grandson will never experience a version of me that they did.
Mhm.
And
Right.
and it's just incredible. They're the best cheerleaders, you know? And
Yeah.
I've got a partner too. Like it sounds like Shane has, that's just so patient and accepting me as who I am, just wants me to be a healthy version of who I
Yeah.
am, you know?
Yeah. And at the start, when I really started to commit to the program, and I really, at that point, probably still, I couldn't do it for myself yet. But,
Mhm.
starting to do it for my daughter planted that seed that after a little bit of time and just being positive and coming home at the end of a workday to people that cared about me. And, I was scared shitless because all I could remember was my experience with my father. And I just wasn't prepared to continue it.
No,
Yeah.
Right.
he didn't leave you a
So,
very good blueprint.
I had to accept responsibility. I couldn't just keep blaming other people for these problems because I'd shown over and over and over again that I couldn't be trusted.
It does me no good to blame other people for behavior that I'm now like that's me now. So if I'm going to judge them, I got to judge me by the same vein. And if I wanted them to do better or wish they had done better, now this is my opportunity to know better and do better.
Yeah. So that was the beginning of real positive times. I did have a few relapses, but at that point, I had learned to live without drugs. So it was much easier for me to pick myself up and to work towards keeping it real. I had the skills at that point, and I could recognize after going out on a binge after being clean for 2 years
Yep.
that I was this close to being right back where I was. That was a big moment for me. And, I started going back to the treatment center and sharing my experiences, right? And, that was huge for me
Mhm.
Being
because
of
now,
service. Yeah.
I was listening. I was not only just working on my own stuff, I was helping others. And that really gave me the sense of, I felt good
Mhm.
because now I was able to share some of the stuff that I had learned through the worst of times. It just gave me a sense of belonging. And that's kind of why, I got into doing safety work. It was kind of the same thing because I wanted to give back.
Mhm.
And that took me out of my crap,
Yep.
you know.
Yeah.
So that's that was a real turning point for me when I finally was able to just let go of a lot of the pain and the stuff that I experienced as when I was younger, and just hope. I had hope again.
When I was in my shit, I was constantly telling myself I was worthless and I was a bad person and I didn't belong and all this stuff. But there's something inherent in service work. Like the minute you step up to help other people or to volunteer for something or to do that good thing, you are also telling yourself, I have value.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can help. I can be of service. I have something. I'm a value individual. And so in serving others, you're defying that narrative
Yeah.
like that you've told yourself your whole life, right?
Yeah.
All that thick skin you built, it's going to pay off as a CSO.
Well,
The
I
the
can
least appreciated person on a job site is the
Yeah.
guy that just wants to see everybody get home safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that from my personal experience, but
No,
I
and
uh,
I value it, but I just want to acknowledge the amount of shit that CSOs put up with
with all those
that'll save
experiences
their life.
that Shane's gone through, I
Yeah.
really think that comes out in his work,
Yeah.
like with his level of care and attention to detail with regards to all aspects of the safety on site.
Nice.
You can see it if you watch this guy work, that's for sure.
Yeah, Shane, you must connect well with the crews, eh?
We try.
Yeah. Do you think your lived experience helps you do that though? Like being in tough places, you understand what some of these guys are going through?
Oh, definitely. We've ran into, everybody's a little different that you meet. Some jobs I've been on, we've had probably 3,500 people go through. it's just nice to be able to be there for people. I'm usually the first person that you'll meet when you come to the job site. We need to do our best to make sure people are communicating with each other, to make sure that we're providing that safe work environment for them, and that we're there for them, right?
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time, like Karen has, listening to stories and people's experiences, and that was very moving.
Yeah.
I think, and what I suspect the audience will connect most with, what I hope they do, is like there's a high level of taking responsibility and accountability for your journey, but at the same time, it occurs. It seems to me that you've done a lot of work around the guilt and the shame, and so you look like you're in this sweet spot of like being able to move forward with a really joyful life, acknowledging sort of the wreckage of the past, but not letting it weigh you down moving forward. And I think I speak to a lot of young men and my age. We've got some wreckage behind us, and we just can't process that. The guilt and the shame just keeps us in this spiral, and that's what I try most to get through to people, is try and get them to where you're at, where it's just like, okay, now what? How do we move forward? And your humility and your vulnerability and sharing that was not lost on me either. Pretty outstanding, Shane. Thank you.
Off the Clock Toolbox Talk has been a Fraser House Society project, executive produced and co-hosted by Karen Jansen, managed by Delan Young on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Production of this material has been made in part through a financial contribution from Health Canada. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada or Fraser House Society. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. Shout out to Victoria BC's Umbrella Society for standing behind this project and for being Victoria's link to reaching recovery together. umbrellasociety.ca. For all folks in the trades, if substance use is negatively affecting your life, you are not alone. Hammer Time is a free online support group for people working in construction trades and transportation. Thursdays, 7 p.m. on Zoom. Go to www.umbrellasociety.ca/hammer-time/. Help save lives. Go to tradespodcast.com and click on the link under Enter to win a $200 grocery card. When you fill out the survey, you help us understand what's working and what's not. Each survey for each episode listened to is a separate entry. Information collected is for survey purposes only and is not shared. Help us, help you.